Hello everyone and welcome to our latest episode of Faces in FinOps, brought to you by ProsperOps with myself, Steve-O, and today I am joined by a good friend who I've known for years now, Dan Ortman. Dan, tell everyone a bit about yourself and how you got to here to be on Faces of FinOps today.
Thanks, Steve-O. Great to be here. Thanks, ProsperOps, for putting this on. Really cool. My journey, been in IT for over 25 years now. I was a CIO for a number of years. Moved into consulting and led a number of different practices, including Microsoft advisory, which I'm still very passionate about, and maybe we'll touch on that a little bit today. But then once we started getting into Azure and managing spend, cloud cost optimization became this huge thing. And then 2019 comes around and JR and the FinOps Foundation, and I was hooked instantly. So been involved very, very early on, and was fortunate enough to serve on the board of directors for the FinOps Foundation for 3 years. Now I'm a global director at Kyndryl, and still love talking about FinOps, and enjoy it every day.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dan. And when we talked about what we were going to do, we had so many exciting things, didn't we? You had some brilliant ideas, things we could talk about. And it was actually hard to get ourselves down to one. So we might sneak in two, right? That's why you mentioned the little the Microsoft advisory piece. But the thing that you said, and immediately I just nodded, is stop checking the boxes, right? So tell people what you mean by stop checking the boxes.
There's so many things you can say you do if you're, for example, going through a FinOps maturity assessment. You can say, yeah, we're tagging. We've got a certain percentage of resources tagged. We've got reporting. We're sharing that with the business. We're doing all of these things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're really successfully delivering FinOps. If you're not getting to that point where you're getting the adoption from all of the different teams or the different business units, if you don't have the executive sponsorship, it might just be cost, but there's so much more to really get to that mature state of FinOps. So I've seen that a lot recently, and I think it would just be great to just chat about it. I don't think a lot of people really cover sort of beyond if you're checking all the boxes, then what?
I've done it, yeah. FinOps done. Although FinOps is never done, right? And I think even the two you brought up in the work I do, I see it really regularly. So yeah, we've got a tagging policy. Yeah, we've got FinOps tags. Yeah, we've got 86% tagging compliance. Okay, is that 86% of your resources have a tag, or 86% of them are tagged correctly? Oh, they have a tag. Okay. When you start digging into it, I think I had one which literally flipped. So like it was 14% not tagged, but actually it was 14% accurately tagged. The number was perfectly paradoxical. When you actually went into, are they following the conventions? Are they expected results? All this kind of stuff. It's really staggering, and there's a lack of governance, but because they've checked the box, right? And you need the accuracy to be successful in FinOps. So saying you've got the policy, you're not even finished there, and it's so easy. And the reports is another great example. Have you really sat down with the people? Are the people using those reports? If you're just firing things to people, and this is one of my biggest challenges, we've both run managed services, right? How do you make that report that you create as a managed service provider something that people use, and not just something that you create because it's an SOW output? And it's the same, anything we're creating, how do we actually get it to embed into the organization in a way that drives better results?
I like to think a really good measuring stick is the business making decisions based on what's coming out of FinOps? And it should be able to. It should be able to make smarter business decisions based on what's coming from the FinOps team. And if the FinOps team is just producing reports and it's just part of the process, and as we're saying, checking the boxes, there's so much more it can be. And I think it's a great way to look at it. If the business is actually making decisions based on that output, then you're in a good spot.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing where I always think you've got to have like a mission, right? A mission statement in any task you do or anything like that. And in reality, for me, FinOps should be helping give the business technology context, right? Because actually you're taking all those different parts. You're taking the finance part. You should be looking at the performance part as well to an extent, or what the output is, the unit economics, and then giving people the information they want to see in a way that actually helps them make those decisions. That context that's really hard, because so often people are making decisions in a vacuum or comparatively. And I've got examples from back in the day we can go through later on where people have made decisions, CFOs have made decisions because on the black and white of the numbers they had in front of them, they were the right decision, but they lacked so much context that could have come from another area. Um, do you see other key areas, like prime example areas of where people are just checking the box, where when you start scratching below, it's not really delivering anything meaningful?
Yeah, I think some of the ones that we've talked about are the big ones that came to mind when we started having this conversation. But when you go through all of the capabilities, if you're truly, which I love, by the way, especially, huge shout out to the foundation for the 2025 framework updates, like absolutely amazing. But going through the domains and the capabilities, I would say every capability has some boxes that you can check. And one of the ones that also stands out is the collaboration. Even one of the key principles is that you have to collaborate. And that can mean different things. And sometimes you can check the box like, yep, the FinOps team, it's collaborating with the cloud team. What about the software asset management or ITAM teams? What about a huge one that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention is the ACM or the change management teams?
Yeah, FinOps is hugely about change, right?
Oh
Like
my gosh,
implementation,
yeah.
anything in that space, it's all about change.
Yes. So why not, if your organization has an organizational change management or an adoption team that's not being leveraged by the FinOps team, it's a huge miss. So I talk about that all the time because it's surprising how often that's just missed. It's like, well, we're talking to the cloud team.
It's a two-way thing, right? Because we should be embedding change processes into how we put forward recommendations, optimizations, and changes, etc. But on the flip side, we should be supporting change process with FinOps data and better planning and estimating, all this kind of stuff. It should be symbiotic.
And by the way, the benefits you get from that, like the executive sponsorship, for example, if you have that change management team, that's second nature to them. Any major change in the organization has to have that backing from the executive sponsorship. So they're used to going and making that case on, why the CIO needs to continuously communicate why something is so important. And so what a great team to have in your back pocket.
100%. There was a debate on one of the Slacks, I think it might be FinOps Connect, I lose track, where someone said that if they look at what's out there in FinOps education, maybe one of the things they'd like to see more of is how to speak to leadership, right? And me and you, with our backgrounds, I've trained people at some of the cloud providers on how to speak to a CFO because it is kind of missing from their vocabulary. But it is true. If you think a lot of people in their roles, and you think about other routes and other job roles, I think this is always an interesting thing to look at FinOps. Like, where do you go? What do you do? How do you get that experience? A lot of people that have kind of gone up the FinOps route haven't had, like other routes, the same experience of going and speaking to senior stakeholders. It's been a lot of working across. And so when it is, how do you speak to execs? You do need allies. You do need mentorship, and that's really challenging. And the change team, they live there a lot of time. I know they do some smaller stuff as well, yeah. But they're everywhere in the business. They know how to speak any language to anybody. If it's a successful team, so you should be embodying that. And also, if you can help them with their rigor by putting in better planning and estimating, and putting in cost as a non-functional requirement of change, they'd love that as well. So it's tit for tat, and it really can help both sides of the organization. But you're so right. I've never really thought of it that way. In terms of them being able to get exec sponsorship, it's second nature, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're doing it all the time.
Yeah. I think it is interesting. So, like, when you go through the framework, I think assessment's an interesting one. It's the one where when I ask people to self-assess before we do their assessment on them, it's one people really struggle with. what does it really mean? Especially when they're like, well, I'm getting you into assess me, so does that mean I passed or whatever? But it can, when you do an internal assessment, quickly become that tick boxing exercise. And so while we are trying to get people to look and review, one of the interesting things that's in the practitioner training is the way we've always done it creates a bias to doing it that way. But that doesn't mean it's the right way. And we need to be constantly open to adaptation. I think that also can be part of it, right? In the box ticking. Oh, we have that process, so we're using it. Not, oh, we should iterate on that process or whatever it may be, and add new.
Or not even that anybody's adopted it.
Yeah, true. So true. Yeah.
Nobody's doing it, but we have a process.
So I'm doing for my sins this week. I'm doing ISO 27001. So it's the security information or information security stuff internally, doing the internal audit ready for it. And you do look at things that kind of go, I remember writing this policy. Are we using it? And you have to then go and really check, right? And it's the same. There's loads of things you can do, and I think that's, if we look how the market's moving in terms of the tooling market, you are definitely seeing moving to some governance engines and some stuff like that. So that's coming out of the fact that people have been writing policies for years and no one's been doing them. So how do you actually drive and enforce these policies? And there's challenges and there's balances to that. But that should help FinOps practitioners out there and to get to that next step of reality, not just we've got a policy, how do we enact it? Because some of that can be done technically, but a huge amount of it comes down to what you said about collaboration and building those relationships. And I don't know if that's something you could easily train. I don't think that's something you can easily assess or even, like, say, in terms of box ticking, do we collaborate? Yeah, I have a call with ITAM once a month, whatever it might be. What value do you drive out of that over time?
I don't know about you, but some of my favorite workshops, I've done so many FinOps in the past just 5 years. My favorites are when you really get all of those different areas of the business in the room at the same time, not doing it. You don't go interview this team and then you interview that team separately. You get them in the room at the same time. And some of these things that we're talking about, where somebody thinks, I made this policy, I communicated it, I've emailed it out, and then I send out this report every month. And people in that room, when they say that, they'll say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that even existed. Yeah. So it's surprising to people that even, and it always circles back to the box checking thing. If you feel really confident and you could genuinely be doing an amazing job creating policy, creating reports, sharing what needs to be shared, and even some teams might be, seeing an impact from that process. But then you get other people in the room, like, finance or ITAM or whoever, and they're like, I could have been using this for the last year and I didn't.
Or I'm already doing that. Did you not know?
Yeah, you're both doing it now. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, that definitely happens. And I think the ITAM one's an interesting one. Me and you both, obviously that's close to our hearts and with the scope stuff. But so often people have been walking around like this or like this because they're either not looking at the software or not looking at the infrastructure. And you go speak to most ITAM teams and cloud's a big black box. We can help with that, And on the flip side, they have a contextual knowledge of some of the stuff going on in ITAM that we just don't know on the FinOps side. Very different challenges, may I add, as well, which has been one of the most interesting learnings for me over the last 2 years, because I very much come from the FinOps side, right? But it's staggering how often that comes across. And I do think it's a lot of the time with finance where people kind of go, I didn't know you did that, because I'm redoing that here, or we're doing that in a finance policy, or sometimes even, yeah, you've made that report, but actually, do you know that doesn't follow like our standards, and that's why we don't use it. And no one's ever said that, like, oh, I'll just do it myself. And these things happen over time, or we were already doing that, we found that way. 100% happens all of the time, and that is so valuable getting people in the room. But it makes you ask, why is that not happening without an assessment? Why in PD's not getting in a room? And I don't know what you think. I think CCOEs have all but disappeared.
Yeah, it's a great point. So I think one of the big things there is, and I hate to say executive sponsorship 5,000 times on this podcast, but the thing is, if it's, let's say it's in IT, let's say FinOps sits in IT or it sits in finance, doesn't matter. Let's say it sits in one of those buckets, and you don't do all the things that we've been talking about, but you're doing an amazing job following sort of the rule book, let's say, following the framework of FinOps. It really is cost policing at that point, because everybody else in those other teams that really are the ones that are clicking the buttons, that actually, make the decisions, their KPIs are a million miles away from what yours are. Theirs are, how do I get this to market faster? How do I meet SLAs? All of these things that will ultimately have the opposite impact, FinOps, because or savings, because they're performance related or speed related, which you're never going to end up with the most cost effective solution if all you're doing is trying to rush it out the door, or if you're trying to, so many of us come from an engineering background. So I know for me, 15 years ago, if I was deploying something and you said, "Oh, Dan, do you want a small, medium, or large server? Do you want SQL Server Standard or do you want SQL Server Enterprise?" I want a large and I want enterprise,
100%.
I honestly believe that the root of all that comes to those individual KPIs and that executive sponsorship. Because if neither of those things change, then why would, as an engineer, why would I adopt this thing that somebody's putting out there that's only going to put my environment at risk, my SLAs, my bonus at risk?
And my KPIs, exactly. And what's more than that, so often it's sent to you as a CSV or a PowerPoint or a PDF or whatever, that it's sent to you by email. As an engineer, you don't live in email. You definitely don't live in Excel. And yes, I know there's this tool over here, but I've already got 6 tools over here that I'm using. I'm looking Grafana for that. I'm going, wherever it might be. And it's just another place, and no one's trying to embed in with my ways of working, and you're asking me to do something that goes outside of my KPIs and stuff. You're literally just adding a burden on, expecting it to get done, but no one shouts at me when it doesn't. And actually, it's not, also I can't track it because I get tracked by tickets or by, whether that be Jira or ServiceNow or whatever, my backlog. That's where my brain and my life lives, because similar to you, I've got a development and an architecture background, and so that's still how I do my job now. Although now I kind of do them and then put them into my calendar to stop people booking my time. But it's the same kind of idea. I've got to have that list, and that's where I live, and I know where they are, and then I can, that's how I can collaborate in a team, because developers and engineers are used to collaboration, right? They live in it. It's a very sad job when you're an engineering team of one, right? But how often are you a FinOps team of one? All the time. So go ask the people that collaborate regularly, how do they collaborate? How can I collaborate with you? Fit in with their systems. Don't just send them an email. There's no way, nothing you can do worse than get something to not get something done. I want to leave some time for us to talk about the Microsoft piece. But before that, any other final piece of advice that you'd give someone on, like how to take a step back and see whether you are just checking boxes, and where maybe you start on taking it that little bit deeper? We've given lots of bits of advice, but
I think it's a catchy phrase, stop just checking the boxes. But we're not saying don't check the boxes. That's important too. Going through the framework, making sure, all of the capabilities are covered, and, you're doing well in all of the different domains. That is important. But I think the piece of advice is start looking at adoption of what those checkboxes are. How well are they being adopted? And just like anything else with FinOps, it's crawl, walk, run. Maybe crawl for adoption is, you're somehow just in a spreadsheet measuring what sort of utilization you get on those reports. How many clicks are you getting? How many people are logging into it? Or even if it's just getting feedback from people directly, and you're just interviewing different people, find a way to measure adoption of the work that you've done. And I think you'd be surprised on how much could be improved in that area.
I think the first time we ever collaborated on anything together, we did a webinar, and I think I made the last statement of the whole thing, and it was something like, in reality, to be successful in FinOps, make friends with people and help them, right? And I've kind of always stuck to that for years, but more recently, I've pivoted, and it comes from. Have you ever watched the show Ted Lasso?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Love it.
Yeah. So there's a great scene in Ted Lasso where he's playing darts with Rupert, and he needs like treble 60 bull to win. And he says, the problem people have is that they're not curious. Because you never asked me, Ted, have you played a lot of darts? Yes, every Sunday from 10 to 16 with my dad. And actually, be curious is a really helpful thing, especially if you're in a small team or you're coming into a place. Go ask people how they do things. Go ask them why they do it. Go ask them how you can help them. Be curious. Go beyond that checkbox and be curious as to, is this working? What more can I do? How can I help it? And I think that's one of the true secrets, the people that you see be more successful. The people that are being successful in FinOps are embedded. They are just part. FinOps is not a separate thing. It is part of the whole. I was mentoring someone in a company from part of the mentor program in the FinOps Foundation, and she had done that naturally. She was part of the platform team. That's where they'd been placed, but she'd spent so long, because she felt almost like imposter syndrome being part of this platform team. She spent so long going and learning about how they did things that actually it made it perfect. And suddenly she was part of that team who knew about this other thing. And when she then brought things to them, it was taken from a really sincere place. And it makes a massive difference because she'd been so curious.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Great scene and
great scene.
Yeah, so true. Like that's such a great analogy.
Right. So the other thing we were going to talk about was some changes, because you are so curious, especially when it comes to Microsoft, that are coming into the Microsoft space that people possibly have either missed entirely, which is 100% possible, because there's been lots of different changes in the Microsoft space that have caused some changes that people may not have paid attention to, but also haven't maybe thought about the impact of. And how that might affect them. So do you want to give people a bit of a 101 of what changes that they need to be looking out for that are coming specifically in November, is it, I think?
A major announcement in the last few weeks here. Microsoft in November will be eliminating the levels. Level A, level B, level C, and level D. There was basically a number of seats would let you move up the stack. And a level D would be your enterprise organizations. And you would get a programmatic discount. It's basically volume discounts. We're going to give you a discount right out of the gate without even negotiating with us. What this impact is, I think some people are sort of brushing it off. Some people are raising the alarm bells. But here's the deal. Because of the expanded scope of the FinOps framework, SaaS is squarely in FinOps, as is cloud spend. So your Azure investment and your M365 investment is squarely in FinOps. And when you look at your rate optimization, the contract negotiation and how you use things like hybrid benefit with Microsoft, how you, what deals or discounts you negotiate on a Mac commitment or other contracts, all that plays into what the value you're getting out of your investment is. It's one of the bigger impacts you can have broadly across an entire spend.
And yeah, especially if we're thinking about user-based. So for people thinking about like types of SaaS, you've got your consumption-based, that's your Databricks, that kind of stuff, and then you've got your user-based, right? And AI is in between the two, which is a super interesting thing. But good user management and cost per user rate, they are your two levers in the user-based SaaS game, right? And this is a definite impact on the rate side. It's like people flattening things like EDPs. So it's just poof, it doesn't matter how big you are anymore. It's people don't know how it's going to land, right? And like I say, people are taking out really different theories and as to the worry and panic. I think I always want to ask why with these things. Well, you're closer to Microsoft than I am, and certainly on that side of it. What do you think's the the driving force behind the change?
So anyone listening to this that's been part of an LSP would say, we've known this has been coming for 12 years, which is true. Microsoft has been slowly changing what an LSP, who would, by the way, that's for if you don't know what an LSP is, for any organization that would have an enterprise agreement, that's the company that would be processing your enterprise agreement, and they would get paid to do so. However, over the last decade, what an LSP is paid to do so has significantly decreased, to the point where it was almost nothing, and which that's why you started seeing a huge shift to most LSPs were shifting to services organizations because it was no longer a viable business model. So I think why Microsoft would do this is it's continuing to push towards different contract types. And that's why, a lot of people have put, the death of the EA, on in a graveyard on LinkedIn, because this is kind of the final nail in the coffin. Like the leveling was a huge reason to continue using the enterprise agreement as your licensing vehicle. But if you're no longer getting that discount, then going to an MCAE or a CSP or there's lots of different contract vehicles. It's starting to level the playing field all the way, where they were just kind of like slowly moving it towards that process over the last decade.
One of the things behind the scenes with Microsoft that people don't realize, there's a couple of things that make Microsoft a bit more complicated in terms of how they've run it because of how they decided. Firstly, they ran 28 different price books. So if you look at AWS and Google, they have a dollar price book. And then even if you pay in pounds, if you pay in euro, it is converted from the dollar one. So the dollar is the source of truth. But actually, they held price books in 28 different currencies in Microsoft. And that's why, was it 2.5 years ago, people had a big change in pricing. It was basically an FX change, but people felt it didn't really take it as that. But they'd basically been winning on the exchange rate for a while. Microsoft had been losing, and they balanced that out. And I thought were relatively generous in how they did that. While it still hurt people because they suddenly found a cost shift, it could have been more punitive than it was. So they've got that complexity, but also behind the scenes, and you'll know this from your background, we've both been resellers. There's pay as you go, there's CSP, there's enterprise agreements. Now we've got MCA, which is bringing some of them together. But behind the scenes, they were totally different. They had different APIs, they have different portals, all of this. It was almost like 3 different clouds. And this feels like part of the push to get down to one type of cloud behind the scenes. They're trying to move to one price book. They're trying to push this in as well. So there's less admin and management, less. I mean, I've been trying to do some work on API stuff with Microsoft, and you have to go and check the documentation. And can I use this one? It's ridiculous at times in the billing space.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's some of it. Do you think there's any chance of this being reverted, like we've seen with the RI exchange stuff that we were talking about before we came on air?
I think they're ripping off the Band-Aid. It's going to hurt, but I think they're going to deal with it. And what'll be really interesting is, especially level C and level D, where they already had such a higher discount, and then they also, because of the commitments that they were making, tended to get much larger negotiated discounts on top of that. So let's say you started with I'll just make up numbers. Let's say you started with a 20% discount, and then you were able to negotiate another 15% discount. So let's say you've got 35% discount across the board, and all of a sudden, if you're not making major new investments and your renewal is in 2026, sometime in 2026, what is your negotiation power? Like, I'm going to leave. Like, that's, what else is there, because if you're not making any new commitments, then your level discount goes away. And then what do you have to stand on to say, dear Microsoft, we deserve 35% discount, from retail? Like, what, why would they do it? So I think the impact is going to be much larger than what some people are anticipating.
I think so. There's going to be a lot of, especially ITAM and commercial people, watching those first few deals go through.
Yeah.
And then people will panic. It's a bit like the VMware stuff, right? People needed to see what the first renewals would be like
What's
with the
going to
Broadcom
happen?
changes. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Right, conscious of time, we've talked about two really interesting topics there, and hopefully very informative for people. I think that Microsoft, a lot of people are going to kind of go, oh, about the Microsoft one for sure. Dan, I just want to thank you for your time. Any final thoughts, any final words that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invite. It's always a pleasure. Love getting to see you, especially at like FinOps X. So thank you so much for the invite. And again, thanks to ProsperOps for putting this on. So I guess the final thing is, I love how fast the community has grown. It's super exciting. And so anybody watching this all the way through to the end, please continue checking the boxes, but go the next level. That's I think the key takeaway for me today.
Yeah, brilliant, love that. And big thank you for me for you coming. It's always great to speak to you. As everyone could see by how much we've enjoyed ourselves, just happened to have cameras here as well. We'd have had just as much fun without. And the conversation would have been exactly the same, right? That's the reality of it when you get two people that are really passionate about a subject. Big thank you to everyone that's watched and listened. I'm not used to saying watched because I do so much audio only stuff. But thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you ProsperOps for sponsoring this and putting it on. It's a great pleasure to do it for a great company. And thank you and bye-bye.